It finally happened. The Vice President of the United States just lit a fuse that has been sitting there for almost 10 years. And y'all need to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what just got confirmed out of Washington is either going to restore your faith in the American justice system or make you madder than a wet cat in a gunny sack. Either way, you need to know every single word of this. J.D. Vance sat down for a podcast interview, and he did not come to play around. He looked right into that camera and said that Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota, quote, definitely committed immigration fraud against the United States of America. Not allegedly, not possibly, definitely. And he went further. He said he personally talked to Stephen Miller about it, and they are actively working through what the legal remedies look like. Y'all, that right there is the Vice President of the United States and the top immigration mind in the White House sitting in a room together trying to figure out how to build a case on a sitting member of Congress. That does not happen every day. That does not happen most years. That is historic. Now here is where this gets layers deep, because there is a lot more to this story than just one podcast interview. The accusations against Omar are not new. They have been floating around since she ran for the Minnesota State Legislature back in 2016. But here is what is different now. For 9 years, every time somebody raised the question, the Obama Justice Department looked the other way. The media called it a smear campaign, and the whole thing got buried under a pile of talking points. What changed is that there is now an actual administration in Washington that is willing to pick up the shovel and start digging. That is not a small thing. That is the whole ball game. So let me walk you through what is actually alleged here, because the media is going to muddy this water as fast as they possibly can. The core accusation is that Omar entered into a legal marriage in 2009 with a man named Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. And investigators and outside researchers have long argued that this man is actually her biological brother. The purpose, according to these allegations, would have been to get him legal status in the United States. That is marriage fraud. That is a federal crime. But here is where it gets even wilder, because the Republic of Somaliland, which is an actual partially recognized African nation, has now stepped in and started posting what they call receipts. They put up documents online claiming that Omar's original family last name was Elmi, not Omar, and that the name was changed when the family came to the United States. They allege the name swap was done to hide the father's true identity and his involvement in what Somaliland describes as crimes against their people. Now, I'm not a judge, and neither are you, but I will tell you this much. When an entire foreign government is pointing fingers and waving documents around, that is not nothing. That is at bare minimum something that needs to be investigated by the people whose job it is to investigate things. And listen, here is what really makes this story different from just another political food fight. Vance did not just talk about the marriage angle. He connected it to something much bigger. And this is the part that should make every single American who pays taxes sit up straight in their chair. He specifically mentioned the Quality Learning Center, which was a daycare facility in Minnesota that became nationally famous when a citizen reporter showed up with a phone and found a building with a misspelled sign on the door and 0 children inside that was somehow accountable for about $4 million in state funding. That center shut itself down in January of this year. But here is what Vance said on that interview. He said he could not say for certain whether Omar knew that the Quality Learning Center was defrauding people, but that it absolutely needs to be investigated. Because if folks can run schemes of that size without even the fear of getting caught, that is a problem that corrodes the whole foundation of the country. That right there is the most honest thing said in Washington in a good long while. Now, back in January, Congresswoman Nancy Mace actually tried to subpoena immigration records related to Omar right there in the middle of a House oversight hearing. And y'all want to know what happened? Both Republicans and Democrats on that committee voted to table the motion. Both parties. May stood up afterward and said Washington did what it always does: protect its own. She is not wrong. And that is exactly the problem that Vance is trying to go around. Because if Congress will not hold its own members accountable, then maybe the executive branch and the Justice Department need to pick up where Congress dropped the ball. Now, Omar's office fired back right away. Her chief of staff called the whole thing a ridiculous lie and tried to frame it as a distraction from the Iran war and gas prices. Let me tell you something. When your defense to a fraud allegation is to point at something else in the room, that is not a defense. That is a magic trick. A real defense is producing documents. A real defense is opening up the records and letting everybody take a look. You do not have to be a lawyer to understand that. You just have to have spent 5 minutes at a card table in Nacogdoches. And here is the thing that ought to really cook your brisket slow. Newsweek and others have pointed out that denaturalizing a sitting citizen is a high bar to clear. It requires a civil case filed by the Justice Department and a judge to rule that citizenship was obtained through willful misrepresentation. It is not a quick process. It is not a snap of the fingers. But here is what that tells you. If Vance and Miller are sitting in a room talking about building that case, it means they believe they have enough to start. You do not start a process like that over a hunch. You start it because the paper trail is already there. Here is what all of this means on a bigger level, and I want you to think about this part real carefully. The Feeding Our Future case out of Minnesota, which the Attorney General under Biden called the largest pandemic relief fraud ever prosecuted in this country, already produced more than 50 guilty pleas and 7 trial convictions. Billions of dollars stolen from programs meant to feed children. And that whole network grew up right in the congressional district that Ilhan Omar represents, over years and years, while she was the congresswoman there. Now, maybe she knew and maybe she did not. That is for investigators to find out. But the question of what she knew and when she knew it is a completely legitimate question. And the fact that it took this administration to finally start asking it out loud tells you something about what the last several years looked like in terms of real accountability. This is what justice deferred looks like, y'all. It does not always look like a courtroom drama. Sometimes it looks like 9 years of unanswered questions, a pile of documents from a foreign government, a vice president on a podcast, and a White House team sitting around a table finally doing the math. Whether you like the politics of it or not, somebody in this country has to be willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to a congressional office, especially if it leads to a congressional office. Because that seat does not come with a get-out-of-jail-free card. At least, it is not supposed to.